Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. It is always a privilege to be back with you again for another interesting week as you are paying attention to current events and I am paying attention to current events. There's so much that we have to talk about. And for me, when I'm thinking about what to discuss on the podcast, I'm not just thinking about current events that are happening on a national level or international level, but I'm also thinking about what happens in my local community or in other local communities, because I think that addressing broad issues is important. It's also important for us to address some local issues that impact us on a more local level. And usually those issues relate to how we engage with one another in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and in our families. So while it's important for us to be aware of what's happening on a national level, and I know because right now we're in the midst of a serious campaign for the presidential nomination or election in 2020, the national issues can overshadow some local issues. So all issues are important. However, we have to understand that those that are local are probably the ones that are going to affect us the quickest and affect us the most. So all issues are important, but it's important, in my opinion, to really be aware of what's happening in our local levels. And then, of course, the Nora Speaks podcast shares general information that are transferable, whether you're in New Jersey, where I am, or if you're in Detroit, or if you're in Illinois, or if you're in California, because principles are universal. So what I may speak about that specifically happened in my state of New Jersey or in my local municipality, you could find that the same conversation could be had in your own community related to what's happening locally for you. It's always a privilege. I say that each week because I really do mean that. It's a privilege to come before an audience of people who are interested and dedicated to improving the outcomes of your community. And I commend you for being one of those people. It is not easy. It is not a cakewalk. Our people don't make it easy. Those who are in positions of power that are happy with the status quo don't make it easy. Our self-hatred and lack of ambition to really go after meaningful change, that gets in the way. So for those who are working to serve our people in ways that are unpopular, for those who are working to share unpopular messages with our people, I commend you, and I want to encourage you to keep going. I want to encourage you to continue to be a source of information, a source of inspiration. And while you and I may be working in different fields or in different industries to impact our people, wherever you are working, whatever your method is for reversing course on some of the negative trends in our community, I commend you and I encourage you to keep going. You have a sister and a partner in that endeavor here with Nora Muhammad and the Nora Speaks podcast. In this particular episode, you may have heard the phrase or seen it on social media as I have. It's the phrase that says, "I am not my ancestors." And typically that is in reference to some of the brutality that's happened by state actors like law enforcement, where our people have been abused, brutalized, assaulted, or killed. And in these protests to that brutality, we have folks from amongst our own community and they say, I am not my ancestors. And in that, they're suggesting that the ancestors were compliant or willing victims of oppression or willing victims of the brutality that happened in the 400 years, specifically during chattel slavery with our people. And I think that that is a very dishonorable thing to say, I am not my ancestors, because our ancestors who served this nation under a harsh and brutal regime of state-sanctioned terrorism, state-sanctioned servitude, state-sanctioned slavery, those people who served their slave masters, we can look back and suggest they were just willing victims or they were compliant. We can look back. We are so far removed from that experience. And many of us don't have the fortitude. We don't have the tenacity. We don't have the endurance to withstand the pressure that many of our foreparents endured. So it, in my opinion, is an insult to those people who suffered, to those people who planned those revolts, to those women who were brutalized, to those men who were brutalized, often in attempts to save their own children, to save in some way their fellow slave. A woman who offered herself to save a man that she loved. Here we are in 2020, sitting in our air-conditioned homes, riding in our cars, working our corporate jobs, attending colleges and universities. And we say, I am not my ancestors, as if the indignities that those individuals faced were done so as willing and compliant slaves. In our attempts to fight back against injustice, use better language and be more thoughtful in our language. Because some of us, in saying, I am not my ancestors, as if these people, and I'll say, I disagree with the integrationist movement, with desegregation as it happened in America. Now, I do believe that desegregation has really destroyed the Black community in ways that we have not yet recovered, especially economically. Other ways, but especially economically. So I do believe that desegregation had its negative impacts on our people, but I do not agree and I disagree with the methodology that our foreparents endured or practiced to integrate schools, to integrate buses, to integrate diners and restaurants. The idea of being passive or nonviolent is a good one when you're not going to be met with violence from the person or the system that you're protesting. However, if you are met with violence, if I am met with violence in my peaceful activity, I believe that it is our natural human right to defend ourselves, just as any animal of the woods, of the forest, of the jungle is naturally going to defend itself, because self-defense preserves life, and life and the preservation of life is natural to all of us. So I disagree with the methodology, but I do not suggest that those men and women who endured and who had the discipline to endure physical attacks, I don't suggest that I'm better than them because I didn't experience it and would not subject myself to that. I know that it takes a level of discipline that many of us do not have. Again, I totally disagree with the methodology, but I know that these people had a force of will that many of us do not have today. And so for us to say, I am not my ancestors, we are insulting the very people who came before us and endured such a thing. And so we say, I am not my ancestors. And I think that maybe some of us, our ancestors' worst fears. Some of us, maybe many of us, maybe most of us, are our ancestors' worst fears. So I think about our ancestors who were on the plantations, women whose children were snatched from their bosom, sold to another plantation to never be loved, hugged, nurtured by them again. I think about those men who had to watch their women be brutalized in their face as they're thinking about the end of the trauma, the end of the brutality, the end of this slavery, the end of the system that maintained slavery, the end of the system that maintained Jim Crow, that maintained black codes, slave codes. When I think about our people who endured that, not just the physical trauma, but the mental trauma, I try to imagine, what is it that they're hoping for to happen for their people? What is it? What outcomes do they wish to happen for their people? And so as I review our condition today, I really think about, are we the fulfillment of their wishes and their hopes? Are we the fulfillment of their greatest fears? So as I assess this, and I assess myself, and I assess what I see happening amongst our people in a collective way in this country, I think, what would be our ancestors' worst fears? One, complacency with our own subjugation. I'm speaking about a condition of becoming numb, almost anesthetized. Some who've had certain medical procedures, there's something called a twilight sedation, where you're totally out of it. You have no control or awareness of what's happening to you. You're not quite unconscious, but you are completely helpless. I imagine that our ancestors would not want us to be in this numbed state that many of us are in, as we are maintained in this country in a subjugated state, not just by, wicked people, policymakers, legislators, not just that, but even in the ignorance of our own condition and what we do with each other. I imagine our slave foreparents, who came out of slavery, who were sharecroppers, who had to sustain the Jim Crow era. I'm sure they would not feel good in projecting their thoughts into the future, in thinking that there would be a time where we would still be in a modern day subjugated condition and just be numb to it. We're just living life. We're not going to address it. I have a level of comfort, or what appears to be comfort, and I'm not going to address it at all. Another fear that I imagine our slave foreparents, our ancestors would have, is the level of assassination that we do with each other, character assassination, the treasonous behavior that we engage in with one another. How many of us are doing hit jobs on each other? Now, in my opinion, regardless to what I think about another sister or another black brother, because of what they're doing that I think is criminally wrong, morally wrong, spiritually wrong, I believe that their actions will define them. And it is not up to me to go out in front of the public, as some of us do, whether it's on a broad stage or a local stage, and we assassinate that person's character using slander or defamation, or even if what we think we're saying is true, or even if it is true, that we take it upon ourselves to lambaste our own people. It does not serve us. It does not serve the resurrection of our people. It doesn't serve the rehabilitation or the freedom and independence of our people when we are assassinating one another's character. In fact, I will say that it serves the continued oppression of our people when we're the ones who are so treasonous to our own to assassinate each other's character. And for many of us, it is unfortunate that we have developed an appetite. We've developed an appetite, a sick appetite to tear one another down. And the more grimy, the more slanderous, the more sleazy the scandal, and our sharing of it and our retelling of it, even if we think it's true, even if it is true, whether it's false, we have to stop being complicit with the destruction of our own people. And we are complicit in so many ways, whether it's through the media that we promote, whether it's through the gossip that we share. We have to not be treasonous with our own people. Again, I do not agree with everyone that I hear, with everyone that I see, but it is not for me to condemn my own people. Now, there is condemnation that is deserved, certainly, but it is not for me to be the one to do it. And in fact, it is not for me to put down another person because I think that they're wrong. There's a saying, and you may have heard this, that you do not have to condemn a dirty glass. You put a clean glass next to it, and the works or the evidence is all the condemnation that you need. So even if you disagree, even if you think somebody is wrong, it is not for you to be the one to go out into the forefront and assassinate your own people. What does that say about us? As we are continuing to fight for justice, for observation of our human rights, for acquiring civil rights, that we are the lead in assassinating our own Black brothers and sisters. What does it say about us? I imagine that one of our ancestors' greatest fears would be this disunity that we see. You know, everybody wants to be an individual. Everybody wants to be a leader. We engage in this separation, and there's so many different groups. There's so many different movements, and that's okay. But our inability to work together, again, as I said, I may disagree with someone else's method to achieve what they think is independence or what I think is independence. I know some people disagree with me, but I am not going to be a saboteur to my own people. And in fact, I'm not going to waste time debating whether I'm right or you're wrong. And I don't want you to waste your time debating with me, debating ideologies, debating theories, when we could be building and collaborating instead of competing. And so this disunity and this working against each other is in the way. Our ancestors wanted peace. Our ancestors wanted freedom. That's what we wanted. That's what they wanted. That's what we want today. And so being disunited, being treasonous with our own, being complacent and numb to this condition, that's not our pathway towards freedom. And I imagine that's not what our foreparents projected in their minds, because we imagine that at some point the suffering will stop. We imagine at some point the hurt and the pain will go away, that there will be an end to this. And in many ways, we continue this experience that they've had and this awful experience that we have today. Something else, we cannot be so unstrategic, so uncalculating in our methodology. So on a previous episode, I talked about the ongoing protests after the George Floyd killing, the Breonna Taylor killing, the Ahmaud Arbery killing, and again, the killing of Black people by state actors, namely the police and law enforcement. And I talked about defund the police and the phrase and what that means and what that sounds like. That is probably one of the greatest unstrategic movements to defund the police. Now, people will say, well, no, we don't mean to abolish police departments. We mean a reallocation of resources. Are you telling me that we couldn't be more strategic in the language than to choose a phrase that suggests that we want to abolish the police, defund the police? That is so unstrategic and so uncalculating. And maybe it was a phrase that was thrown out there as a whim. I almost hope that it was, that somebody was speaking and the phrase came out. I hope nobody sat at a table or in a boardroom with others and said, now, what is the plan now? And somebody raised their hand and said, let's defund the police. Let's make that our slogan. And others at that table agreed with that and came out with a consensus that that's the slogan. I hope that that was shot out there as a whim. I hope that that was not pre-planned. But whether that was pre-planned or not planned, that is unstrategic. If we want to modernize or reform law enforcement, if we want to have a say in the training of law enforcement officers, the length of training, the type of training, there's better words that we could have used to come to that end. But I'm going to tell you, I do not want my sons, my brothers, my neighbors, to myself, to be violated by law enforcement. And I don't want the police defunded. I would like training. I would like sensitivity. I would like us to police our own selves. I would like longer training. You know, some say it takes longer to get a barber's license than to become a law enforcement officer, deputized with a gun, a lethal weapon. So I would like some changes, but I do not want the police defunded. And so if we want change, then we have to be more strategic, more calculated, more tactical in our thinking, in our use of words, and in our organizing. Because here now we have two candidates that are running for presidency, and whichever the side of the aisle you're on, maybe you're in the middle, I don't know. And for this conversation, it really doesn't matter. But here we have them using our own words against us. You know, will these people want to defund the police? That's going to leave your community unsafe. So, see, they can take what we say and use it against us. So we have to be more strategic. Something else, we have this awful short-term memory in our community. And what I mean by that is our initial emotional response to some injustice. We have an initial emotional response that takes the place in marches and boycotts and sit-ins and street movements. But after time passes, we do not put any action or activity to address the injustice. We have a short-term memory problem. Now, as our ancestors were projecting their thoughts to the future and what the end of suffering for their people would be like, and here we are 300, 400 years later, and we are still being brutalized in the most inhumane of ways, not just through what we see with issues like George Floyd or Mike Brown. I'm not just talking about that, but I'm talking about the marginalization in housing, in unemployment, in all of the areas that impact quality of life, education. Here we are continuing in this suffering. And when there is an injustice, the school resource officer slamming the black girl, the school resource officer handcuffing a 5 or 6-year-old child. We have an emotional response initially that may culminate in a march, that may culminate in a protest, that may culminate in Facebook posts, yet with no action to follow that will benefit our people. We have a short-term memory problem. Another thing that we have to address, we say, I am not my ancestors. No, we're not. If we had the character and force of will that some of our ancestors had, even in that awful condition, and we applied it with all of the freedoms that we have today, all of the access that we have today, then we could be in a much better condition. But we're selfish. Earlier, I mentioned the way a woman would offer her body to a slave master so that that slave master would not brutalize her child or the man that she loved or another slave. We have this idea, and you've heard this before, I got to get mine, you got to get yours. I got to get mine, you got to get yours. I got mine, you get yours. We have a selfishness about us where once we attain whatever it is that we've attained, whatever position that we have, whatever access that we are granted, we forget and don't create avenues for the rest to have the same access, to attain the same resources, to acquire the same that we have. We become selfish. I got to get mine. You got to get yours. And I have to say that is not an inherent trait in our people. But that's one that has been put there, and we tolerate it and we allow it. We even have this conversation about our own children, about our nieces and our nephews, about our neighbors. I got mine, they got to get theirs. Well, what are you doing? What am I doing to create ease of access for the next generation? Or are we going to let them start from square one like we did? And we continue to have generation after generation after generation starting from square one. And so now one of the buzzwords or buzz phrases and issues is the wealth gap, the wealth inequality gap. Well, if we have the mindset that I got to get mine and you got to get yours, how are we diminishing the gap? Meaning diminishing the oppressive economic condition that our people have if we're going to let each generation start from square one, because we're not going to set a foundation for the generation coming behind us, because I got mine and they got to get theirs. We have to come out of the selfish thinking because it is not beneficial for the needs of our people. It is selfish, and we all have to exist in this world together. I got to get mine. You got to get yours. That is not right. And that is not how successful and progressive people think about their own kind. People generate wealth from home ownership. For example, it is important that we acquire homes, that we own land. That way, the generations coming behind us have a foundation so that they can continue the wealth growth. But because we have a selfish, I got to get mine and you got to get yours, we leave our people out in the cold. And sometimes we're happy to be the only one in the room. Sometimes we're happy to be the only one at the board table. And sometimes we're not, but we don't know how to bring others along. We can't be selfish with this, I got to get mine, you got to get yours mentality. Our people deserve better than that. And that is not how our foreparents were able to survive the trauma that they endured through selfishness. And selfishness is not inherent in the nature of our people. Something else that I imagine would be one of the greatest fears of our ancestors. It is our, how should I say this? Our guilt forgiveness or our guilt relief. I think about loan forgiveness. If someone goes to college and they go teach in an urban poor district and they have the opportunity to have their student loans forgiven, we ourselves have a guilt forgiveness wherein we absolve the people who are the architects of the very system that created the trauma, the pain, the indignities, and the insults to our people. I talked earlier about this short-term memory. So from the plantations to the boardrooms I'm talking about, I'm not just talking about what happened on the plantations and us looking back and saying, well, that was history, what's in the past, America is better now. There are indignities, there are traumas that are happening today that are planned out in boardrooms and that are enacted in our neighborhoods, that are enacted in our school systems, that are enacted in the educational systems for our children and for ourselves. And so we have this guilt forgiveness where we don't want to hold anyone accountable. And if we're not holding a system or the architects of a system accountable for the total destruction and annihilation of the human dignity of our people, then we disqualify ourselves from having access or having some kind of a repair or deserved repair or entitlement to damages. Anytime there's, let's say, a theft, right? I steal someone's ring and I pass that ring on down to my daughter and she passes that ring down to her daughter. Well, what about the woman I stole the ring from? Is that ring now really entitled to her granddaughter? Because I took it. Or are we going to say, no, please, we're going to forgive what happened in the past. And now that granddaughter loses the entitlement to something that's hers. And so when we absolve or engage in this guilt forgiveness, then we absolve ourselves from the entitlement of damages. And we are owed damages. Now you're saying, are you saying that you believe in reparations? I do believe in repairing damage that was done. And the person that should repair the damage is the person who's responsible. And if that person who's responsible is not present, there are those who have benefited from the damage that was done to us. Somebody is still responsible, if you understand what I'm saying. So this guilt forgiveness, this guilt relief that we engage in is not beneficial for the salvation of our people, for the freedom of our people, for the peace that our people are entitled to. We are entitled to be made whole. And so we just totally want to wipe the slate clean, and we are 400 years behind everybody else in this country? That doesn't sound fair to me. And I can't imagine our ancestors being okay with that. And just the last point that I will make about our ancestors' greatest fears, and that is the self-hatred that we have amongst each other. Where one example is us in our rejection of our own leaders for those whose interests are not our own. It is hard for us to unite. It is hard for us to sustain meaningful activity that's going to improve our condition. We are so placated, and folks who are in positions of power understand our psychology better than we do. And so they play on it. This nation could not keep a people in a subjected state for hundreds of years, keeping us from the ability to read and to write and to practice our own religions. A people who could do this to another people are not ignorant. They're very wise. And so we have to recognize that they do have wisdom, that they have extreme power, that they are a powerful people. And so when we have initiatives that are forwarded to us that are not beneficial to us, whether these initiatives are forwarded by those who are outside of our community or inside of our community, we have to reject them. And I know that it's hard for us to start grassroots. I know that the riches of the wealthy are so tempting because we have not known massive wealth in this country. Now, we have massive wealth, but we have not enjoyed it yet. So when we're opportunities to have high incomes, to have access, when we have access to the boardrooms, then we may find ourselves in a weak moment compromising on the needs of our people because of what we can get for ourselves. And then in general, we have a hard time accepting direction from another Black person. We do. It's something that we've experienced for so long in this country, where we have a rejection for something that's Black. I know that there's a Black-owned movement right now. I know. And I have concerns about that because I don't want us to replace one capitalistic system that exploits our people for another capitalist system that exploits our people, but it has a brown or Black face on it. So we have to be very cautious of accepting and entertaining those who represent interests that are not our own. One, we have to know what our interests are. And then we have to support those who are sacrificing to make a way for our interests. And our self-hatred that's manifest through jealousy, through envy, that's manifest through slander and gossip, that's manifest through character assassination and the treasonous way in which we deal with each other. That self-hatred is real and it's alive. And we have to kill it in the Black community because it is not in the best interest of the needs of our people. Some say, I'm not my ancestors. I agree. We do not have the force of will, the spirit, and the endurance of those who came before us, whether they were successful or unsuccessful in their movement to free our people, to make our people independent, to achieve civil rights or human rights for our people. We are a people that have been so damaged that we would look at our ancestors who suffered under such brutality and in a way demean them by suggesting that they were complicit or compliant in their subjugation. Shame on us for taking that position. And I would say that possibly some of us are our ancestors' greatest fears. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@norahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.